New England somehow, even though being one of the closest teams to said lab that had a massive mistake, wasn't a part of the massive COVID scandal that was going down in New Jersey with the NFL testing, which we'll also talk about today. 77 players got false positives, all from one New Jersey lab. I have a big question for you. Will conspiracy fodder find any of that type of thing happening? Yes. Somehow the Patriots aren't a part of it. What are the Patriots doing? Well, they're obviously sending in somebody with COVID who's testing all these teams. They're on all these things, and now we got false positives everywhere. That's a big deal, though. That has to get figured out. Now, the lab came out with an entire statement. It was like a diatribe, basically, about how they found some inconsistent or irregularities in the testing, blah, blah, blah. We found it. It was an isolating incident. Now we move on. And I bet the NFL's like, oh, that's just what we do? We just move on from that? How do we know that isn't going to happen on a Friday or a Saturday? And 77 players are out, or coaches, too, not just players, 77 coaches, players, anything like that. How do we figure this out? I don't think anybody knows. They're just hoping that Yale saliva test that's supposed to come into town is much more accurate than whatever they're doing now. What up there?
I assume the NFL, when the lab was like, oh, we're just going to move on for this, the NFL's like, well, we're probably just going to move on from you handling our testing.
But I don't know if that's possible, because I think there's only like 3 or 4 companies that oversee all those labs, basically. So like there's it's a very interesting. I don't know how many different places.
Big labs. Huh?
I don't know how many people you can tell to go fornicate themselves in the lab business, because I think they're all kind of connected. I believe all of them are connected. So you can't just be like, well, you're cool. I don't think you can do that with the lab business. I'll be intrigued to see how they figure that out. Also joining us on the couch, a man who will be EP of this show starting September 7th, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mansuri.
Well, to your point, Pat, you got 2.5 weeks to figure it out, and there are only so many reputable names in the game. You can't put the NFL season in jeopardy. You got 2.5 weeks. Figure it out.
Well, the issue with this all is, there's always going to be some angle that fans are going to take, like, oh, well, who set this up? Who did it? Because you can't, in 2020, you can't help but think if something bad happens, you're like, well, who did it? And everybody's going to point directly to that city right there, no matter what's going to happen until something happens to them. But let's say all 3 of these, whoever the 3 labs are, let's say all 3 of them happen to have an issue. Then what? The NFL has to be stopped for a couple of weeks and it's all false positives? I mean, presumed negative is the new term up in Detroit, because Matt Stafford's family's life was changed because of a false positive. There's a lot to deal with. They're going to have to juggle it. But the NBA is making it happen. The NHL is making it happen. Still, Major League Baseball is making it happen. They had a couple early outbreaks, a couple big news, but I haven't really heard much about that since. Maybe because nobody's talking about baseball, but I would assume if there was another massive COVID outbreak, people would be talking about baseball again. So people are making it happen. The NFL will make it happen, but this weekend, it's preseason for these labs too. Hey, it's preseason for these labs too. So sorry to interrupt. If you're a man watching this, you deserve to have long, great. And you can do that now with our friends at Roman. Right now, you go to GetRoman.com. You get $10 off and free 2-day shipping on Roman swipes, which are guaranteed to make you have longer, more fulfilling every time you get in the sack. Now, let's get back to the fornicating action. This lab in New Jersey with 77 tests for 11 NFL teams that have all come back as a false positive, and there's an entire cluster truck of everything that happened in there. How is the NFL, and I know the lab has come back and said, we figured out what it was, we got that out of there. How is the NFL handling this internally? I assume there is some people that are very, very worried about this happening in the middle of the season and causing quite a problem in a workflow for everybody.
So Sunday morning was this really interesting dichotomy. On the one hand, there are 3 players, 3 in the entire league, who are on the reserve COVID list. There are about 2,600 players on rosters right now, and only 3 of them are on the reserve COVID list, which either accounts for guys who have tested positive or have been exposed to somebody who may of themselves have been positive. So that's a really good number, 3 out of 2,600. On the other hand, as you illuminated, there's a really fine line here right now. I know the NFL, there were some anxious moments yesterday morning and also Saturday, because this did also involve the testing from Saturday. Now, it happened to be that there were a decent number of teams that had scheduled days off on Saturday, so it didn't necessarily cease operations surrounding practice or other work inside the facility on Saturday, but Sunday morning was a tenuous moment for the NFL. It was a reminder that as much progress as we've made and as good of a job as the NFL has done, that there is no margin for error with it. It doesn't take a bunch of people acting irresponsibly or a bunch of people contracting the virus. It takes one person to contract the virus for a lot of things to go haywire. And it asked this question without actually intending to do so. What happens if it wasn't Saturday night before August 23rd?
Oh, yeah.
It was, what if it's Saturday night before week 4 or something of that nature? And I think the NFL feels fortunate.
Week 16.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it could be the Super Bowl for all we know.
Yeah.
So I think the NFL feels fortunate that timing was maybe in its favor in this regard. And I do think, as much as it's going to suck to have to go through a lot of these things, the NFL is probably going to find some silver lining in sort of working through some of the issues before the season begins. Kind of a test trial without actually being a test trial. So if there was any positive coming from this, it's not just that all those tests, all 77 of them, were false positives, but also that the NFL has a chance to refine its lab work and its systems and figure out some of the issues that might be diagnosed as errors right now.
What was that word you used early? Dichotomy?
Dichotomy. Yeah, you like that one, huh?
Yeah. What does that mean?
Dichotomy is sort of like, two opposite sides of the spectrum, right? So like, yeah.
Hey,
dichotomy. It's DICH, which is the tricky part.
Oh, you're like a spelling bee master as well, huh? Is that your?
Some of us are made to be super, future WWE champions, and some of us are made to be spelling bee champions.